Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome again to another Talk Architecture podcast episode, and I'm your host, Naziaty Muhammad Yaqub. There seems to be an interest with this topic on how architecture students study business in school. I gave an introduction earlier, and now I'm going to expand this topic. When I presented the idea of how to study business in terms of the studio projects, I am not, shall I say, taking it out of thin air, this idea. It is something that I am always, shall we say, not at the back of my mind, but always conscious of when I do a curriculum at the studio, a studio program. And it's steeped in practicality. It is to do with the real project, the real site, real context. It is to do with everything that is necessary for us to consider when we approach a design project. And it is just encapsulated in the word design problem. We know about architects are not only designers, they have to run a project. And the person who started this questioning at Threads, when he or she asked about 6 years of study, many graduates step into practice with no real sense of how to run a firm, price a project, or negotiate a contract. So these are the 3 points that I would like to expand further. How do you, when you do a project at first year, second year, third year, fourth year, fifth year, make someone skilled and knowledgeable in how to run a firm, a company, how to price a project, and how to negotiate a contract? What are the 3 skills there? So the first one is, when you run a firm, you need to lead. So leadership skill is necessary, and communication and, being a team member, understanding what a team member has to do, giving instructions that are clear and concise, be able to nurture and coach the younger member of a company or a firm. Yes, so you can imagine that the skills that I mentioned just now being practiced in the School of Architecture, in the curriculum. We have a lot of group projects. I mean, just off the bat of my head, or just out of the bat, that was that interesting project where everybody, the first year students were divided into groups and they do a furniture project and they build the furniture. And that's really one of the best projects that they did at that architecture school. Not best in terms of my view, but the students' feedback, how they love that project. And through the mistakes that they did, understanding the processes, being aware of how to work in a team, being aware of your role in the team, stuff like that. Was the first time they learn in a way that we are supervising them as well. There is still some control, and it doesn't, end up in a fight or something. That they love the project. So that is the first step to you actually running a firm eventually when you graduate at the end of 5 years. But of course, there are other projects throughout the 5 years which will gain in terms of skills in running a firm. you can't like say, okay, we got to make like a role playing how to run a firm. We can, but you can also observe people running a firm. And that's one of the practical training issues or things you can pick up when you are in a architecture company after the second year or the third year. And that's true observation, because what architects do well is to observe and note them and then analyze and synthesize them and interpret what's happening. So this is like a bread and butter sort of skill to have. So how to run a firm is also knowing that things have to fall into place, what needs to be done first, and then later step 1, step 2, step 3. So you can do it on your own, and you could also do it in a group project. And there are many group projects. They have to do presentation, they have to do in not only studio projects. So there are always a chance to do group projects and workshops and peer reviews. So pricing a project need the understanding of some rule of thumb, some BQ, bill of quantities understanding, and apart from the theory and understanding the principles, you put together things, right? You could put ballpark figures, and you could actually see when coordinating a work, a real life work, even your own project that is like a small building, you could price it. You get the rule of thumb, and you can actually come up with a price and also include labor costs. You can also do pet projects, meaning construction technology projects where you visit sites and you could be exposed to how the architects, the different, how the system work, meaning how architects on site, the resident architect would be taking care of the cost of the project not being too costly in the end, or things not going away from the contracted price. Things like that. You could be exposed to those things in some of the subjects. For a design thesis, I mentioned about costs and benefits, and costing, how much the overall cost is for the design thesis. You can do it with an economics lecturer as part of the program. And then you could do the costs and benefits, like I mentioned earlier in my first introduction episode. Negotiating a contract. There could be role playing here in project management studies, where if this is a very important factor or skill to have or be aware of, then it could do a role playing workshop or seminar, or workshop would be best, with the students giving different roles, and the one with the sales and marketing as well. I mean, this thing to do with convincing the client is a psychological exercise as well, in terms of body language and other things that you need to know. So what I'm trying to say is that earlier I was mentioning about sales and marketing, because I want to also give this point. This is the other thing that I want to do in the follow-up today, about the similarities in architecture practice and entrepreneurship in business. Like it or not, architecture school will produce not only architects, but other designers. That is the nature of Gen Zs or whoever are now who are in their 20s when they enter architecture school. They are interested not necessarily in being an architect at the end of the day, but the skills and the experience of doing architecture and coming up to be whatever they want. But having said that, we need to actually be conscious and design the curriculum for the architect. I have said before that we don't have to teach for 5 years, but only 3 years, and we can be as competitive with other degrees for architecture curriculum and just have the other couple of years more of professional practice. And then you get your certification for part 3. Excuse me. So we're going back to this part in this episode, which is very important. Again, the similarities between architecture practice and entrepreneurship in business. So architecture practice and business entrepreneurship are deeply intertwined. Both are fundamentally about design solutions from scratch. Now that design solutions from scratch, from zero, you provide a design solution, is that you need to find out what are the design problems, what are the problems that you need to frame them or understand them, and then you could understand how do you going to solve them, hence the design problem. So that's similar in architecture practice and business entrepreneurship, which require a balance of creative vision and rigorous risk management to turn an abstract idea into a tangible, functioning reality. So the shared core principles in practice and entrepreneurship is vision to reality. Entrepreneurs translate market needs into new ventures, just as architects synthesize client requirements into physical structures. The processes of data collection or gathering information and research is similar. Both require imagining a future state that does not yet exist and methodically constructing it. Another core principle is risk and resource management. Both disciplines demand strict oversight of budgets, timelines, and personnel. Architects navigate zoning codes and construction delays, codes of practice. Entrepreneurs pivot around market shifts and cash flow hurdles. And the third core principle is iterative problem solving. Just as startup refines its product based on user feedback, an architect constantly alters designs and details to meet structural realities and client demands. So there's also that thing that I mentioned earlier, which is the architect as an entrepreneur. And you can read up a lot more on this, on how we need to think about the architect as an entrepreneur. And even more so in the era of artificial intelligence, don't you think? The practice of architecture goes beyond the drafting board. Running a successful firm requires many of the same skills as operating a startup. So one thing that the architect has to do is business development. Securing architectural commissions requires aggressive networking, pitching, and client relationship building, the exact equivalence of securing investors and customers in business. And another factor is interdisciplinary leadership. Architects act as general contractors, engineers, and mediators, coordinating diverse teams. This mimics a founder managing developers, marketeers, and shareholders. It is true that there is this leadership thing going on, and especially if you're a small business, sometimes a one-person show, and then you might get to 10, maximum 10 people working for you. And there is this management that you need to do if you are the CEO or the principal, in which if you have good people working for you, they could be your assistant or they could fill in where you are not there. And it's the same for both a traditional architecture practice and operating a startup. So these points, I was just telling how there are similarities between the practice and entrepreneurship in business because of the original question that was asked earlier. So why I say it's not only about money, obviously, one of the things in business, you have to learn so many other things. Like we have said just now when we listed issues regarding that we need to be managers, very good managers, and manage our team. So it is getting more complicated, but we are not far from what is the role of the architect and how the architect is, shall we say, educated from years before, from the last century until now. It's just that we are transitioning, just that we are losing some identity, that we are more of one thing rather than the other thing, and that we need to actually grasp all this and go back to basics in terms of understanding that architecture education needs to be both a good learning experience for the development of the architect, to be the traditional architect, and also to be other entrepreneurs or architectural entrepreneurs, which can be go into other design disciplines. So thank you very much for listening to this second part follow-up. And sorry about the voice, still struggling about the voice, and hope you guys, every one of you, have a good time and understanding that this is a topic that is very new and people kind of like wonder about this thing that I said about design problem, which I will discuss later in the second or the follow-up to this episode, still under the topic of how architecture students study business in school. Thank you very much.